Peace and love, family. This is the Hope Helping Our People Elevate YouTube channel. If you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button. If you're a returning viewer, as I always say, I appreciate you for helping me build this platform. Today, we're going to discuss the Gullah Geechee story, from chains to culture, the untold, from chains to culture, the untold story of enslavement and freedom, surviving in enslavement and preserving freedom. This one ain't gonna be too long. It's gonna be a short little video. But without holding y'all, like I say, hit that subscribe button. We're on the route to 1,000 subs. So hit that sub if you're new, if you haven't, if you're a returning viewer and you just check the content out, but you ain't subbed yet, hit that sub button. It's free to support. We're gonna jump straight into it. We're gonna jump straight into it. Peace and love, family.
On behalf of Akuno Sankofa Bay, you know what I'm saying? Jay, where you at? We're trying to help our people elevate. Hope. H-O-P-E. We're giving them hope. We doing what we gotta do, you know. Every day, one step at a time, man. We gonna make it happen. Helping our people elevate. Yeah. Sometimes I practice focus, thought, and meditate. I'm trying to come with other ways to help our people elevate. And seeking knowledge make me levitate. The lifted mental state is what results from how we orchestrate. This for the family's sake. Let's self-reflect and self-evaluate. And every day, make sure the steps you take, you calculate. Receive a master's fate. I know I can't exist without the hate, but that's okay. I balance that with higher self today. Success is on this way, and after that, my flesh can pass away.
What if I told you that one of the largest slave revolts in America wasn't a single rebellion, but a decade-long war? Today, we'll uncover the history of how these African-descended people far back forged alliances and left a lasting legacy of freedom and resilience. The Gullah Wars, also known as the Seminole Wars of 1816 to 1858, were a series of conflicts fought primarily in Florida between the United States government and an alliance of Seminole Native Americans and African-descended people, many of whom were former slaves. These wars highlight the intertwined struggle of African-descended people in indigenous communities resisting slavery and colonial expansions. The Gullah people are descendants of Africans brought to the Low Country region of South Carolina, Georgia, and northern Florida during the transatlantic slave trade. These Africans came primarily from rice-growing regions of West Africa, including Sierra Leone, Senegal, and Liberia, due to their agricultural expertise. Enslavers forced them to work on rice plantations in harsh, malaria-infested coastal regions. Many Gullah ancestors endured brutal conditions during the Middle Passage and enslavement, but they managed to preserve much of their African cultural heritage, including language, spiritual practices, and communal traditions. The isolation of coastal plantations allowed the Gullah culture to remain distinct over time. Let's dive into the origins of the Gullah War. Escape of maroon communities. Enslaved Africans frequently escaped plantations and joined indigenous tribes, particularly the Seminole in Florida. They formed maroon communities, autonomous settlements of escaped slaves, often deep in the swamps and forests where they resisted recapture. Enslaved Africans frequently escaped plantations and joined indigenous tribes, particularly the Seminole in Florida. In Florida, the escaped Africans known as Black Seminoles or Gullah Geechee forged alliances with Seminole Native Americans. These communities blended African and indigenous practices. The First Seminole War of 1816 to 1819. The U.S. invaded Spanish Florida, targeting maroon communities and Seminole settlements that offered refugees to escaped slaves. A major flashpoint that was the destruction of the Negro Fort in 1816, a maroon stronghold on the Appalachian River that had become a beacon for runaway slaves. Thousands of enslaved people escaped to Florida during this period, leading to escalating tensions between enslavers in the U.S. South and communities of free Africans in Florida. The Seminole War of 1835 to 1842. The Second Seminole War was largely driven by the U.S. government's attempt to remove the Seminole and their African allies from Florida to enforce the Indian Removal Act of 1830. The U.S. feared that free Black communities in Florida would inspire large-scale slave rebellions. The African Seminole Alliance fought fiercely, using guerrilla tactics to resist U.S. forces. Leaders like Osceola of the Seminole and Abraham, an African Seminole leader, emerged as symbols of resistance. The Third Seminole War of 1855 to 1858. By the third conflict, most Seminole and their Black allies had been forcibly relocated to the Indian Territory, present-day Oklahoma, or killed. However, small groups continued to resist in the Florida swamps. The legacy of the Gullah Wars. The Gullah Wars were some of the largest and most sustained rebellions against slavery in the U.S. history. The African Seminole resistance directly threatened the institution of slavery by providing sanctuary for runaway slaves and demonstrating the possibility of organized rebellions. Me personally, family, I mean, who wants to be in chains and shackles, watching their mothers and fathers being tortured, and I mean the things that they went through? Just come on, I mean, I'd rebel too. Sustained resistance. The Gullah Wars were not an isolated incident, but a protracted conflict marked by strategic alliances between African and indigenous people. These groups created resilient communities in the swamps and forests of Florida, blending cultures and pooling their resources to survive and fight against U.S. forces. Major resource drain on the U.S. government. The U.S. government was forced to expend vast amounts of resources, military, financial, and political, over decades to try to subdue these resistant groups. It is estimated that the war cost millions of dollars and thousands of lives, leading to widespread frustration among U.S. leaders. Policy shifts. The sustained resistance led to significant policy reconsiderations. For example, the war directly contributed to heightened fears about instability of the institution of slavery. The government ultimately offered freedom to some resistant Africans in exchange for relocation to territory outside the U.S. borders, particularly the Indian Territory, modern day Oklahoma. This is why so many of the so-called blacks in Oklahoma that know that they have indigenous history or know that we have Indian in us or so-called Indian in us, but it's hard for us to trace their lineage because our family was erased from that knowledge. But the truth is told and the truth is known that we are the indigenous people. And I've said that in many of the videos. So if you are a returner, you already know this, I appreciate you. If you're new to the channel, check out some of the old content and it'll show you that. Look at the last video I just dropped where I gave you the etymology of the word American, how it applies to the copper complected people, and you'll see that. Cultural and political legacy. Gullah Wars serve as a reminder of the capacity of marginalized groups to influence national policy and challenge oppressive systems. The alliances forged during the war are also a testament of the shared struggles of African and Native American people against colonial violence. So our ancestors fought side by side, but in today's times it's hard for us to do that. It's really not. We just got to wake up and come together as a people and stop fighting amongst each other. These wars forced the U.S. government to spend millions of dollars and commit thousands of troops to suppress resistance, making them a costly chapter in the country's history of slavery and expansion. How the Gullah people became slaves. The ancestors of the Gullah people were captured in West Africa through wars, raids, and kidnappings by African middlemen who sold them to Europeans and American traders. They were transported to the Americas during the transatlantic slave trade, primarily between the 16 and early 1800s. The rice plantations of the southeastern U.S. were particularly grueling due to the hot, disease-ridden environment, where enslaved people faced high mortality rates. Despite these conditions, the Gullah people retained and adapted African customs, creating a rich cultural heritage that persists today. However, their experiences as enslaved people and their resistance through the Gullah Wars reflect the resilience of African descendant people in the face of systematic oppression. The story of the Gullah people is one of resilience, resistance, and cultural brilliance. Despite the hardship of the past, their traditions endure, offering a powerful testament to the strength and creativity of African descendant people. As we honor their legacies, let us remember the lessons of unity, survival, and enduring power of cultural heritage. Together, we can honor their past and empower future generations. And on that note, if you made it all the way through this video, family, peace and love. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. Make sure you hit that like button. Make sure y'all share this, leave a comment, and I'll catch you on the next one. Peace and love, family.